Ladies, daughters of the Most High God, today I want to speak directly to the woman who feels a stirring in her spirit. You may not fully understand what God is doing in your life right now, but something inside you knows. This is not an ordinary season. This is a divine lifting, a holy separation, a supernatural covering that heaven himself has placed over you. When God covers a woman, everything about her life begins to shift. She may not look different on the outside, but the atmosphere around her begins to change. Battles she once fought, God begins to fight for her. Doors she once knocked on, God begins to open. Tears she once cried, God begins to turn into strength. So, today, I want to reveal 7 signs that you are rising under God's divine covering. When God begins to awaken a new spiritual sensitivity in a woman, it is rarely dramatic on the outside, but it is deeply transformative on the inside. It starts as a quiet stirring, a gentle pull, an inner awareness that something in your spirit is shifting. You may not fully understand it at first, but you feel it. You sense a change in the way you think, the way you pray, and the way you perceive the world around you. What once felt ordinary suddenly carries meaning. What once seemed distant now feels close. It is as though the Holy Spirit begins tuning your heart to the frequency of heaven, and without realizing it, you start hearing God more clearly and feeling His presence more deeply. This spiritual sensitivity often comes after a season of dryness or confusion. Sometimes it comes after a period where you felt numb, disconnected, or overwhelmed by life. But when God's divine covering begins to rise over you, He awakens your spirit again. You begin to notice small whispers, an inner nudge telling you not to worry, a gentle conviction steering you away from something harmful, or a sudden peace that settles in your heart even when circumstances haven't changed. These are signs that God is awakening your spiritual senses, preparing you to rise into the next level of destiny. During this awakening, your prayer life shifts. You may find yourself praying more without forcing it. Your heart becomes softer toward the things of God. Worship feels deeper. Scripture seems to speak directly to your situation. You start noticing God's hand in places you overlooked before. He may speak through a verse, a sermon, a dream, or even through the silence. What matters is not the method, but the reality that God is drawing you closer, and your spirit is responding. This shift also affects your desires. Things that once attracted you start to lose their pull. Conversations that once entertained you now feel empty. Environments that once felt comfortable may suddenly feel wrong for your spirit. At first, you might not understand why, but it is because God is tuning your sensitivity to align with His will. He's protecting your spirit by changing your appetite. When God covers a woman, He sanctifies her desires. He purifies her motives. He shifts her focus from the temporary to the eternal. You begin seeking peace instead of approval, purpose instead of popularity, and truth instead of comfort. Another sign of spiritual sensitivity awakening is an increased awareness of spiritual battles. You begin discerning things you once ignored. You sense when something is off. You feel when a situation is not good for your spirit. This is not fear. This is spiritual discernment. The Holy Spirit sharpens your intuition, not to make you suspicious, but to keep you safe. Under God's covering, your spiritual instincts become stronger. You begin to see beyond the surface. You pick up on spiritual atmospheres. You feel the difference between what is from God and what is not. This is part of your rising. God is equipping you. You may also notice an unusual hunger for God. You want to grow. You want to change. You want to heal. You want to learn His voice more clearly. This hunger is evidence that the Holy Spirit is at work within you. A woman who is rising under God's covering becomes spiritually thirsty because God is preparing her for deeper revelation. Her heart opens, her ears open, her spirit opens. She becomes sensitive to moments where God is calling her to pray, to rest, to listen, to worship, or to wait. And every time she obeys that prompting, her spiritual sensitivity grows stronger. This awakening is not always emotional. Sometimes it is very quiet. You may feel calm, still, or steady rather than excited. That is also God's work. He doesn't always awaken sensitivity through fire. Sometimes he does it through gentle peace. You simply realize that your heart is becoming aligned with his heart. Your thoughts are becoming clearer. Your decisions are becoming wiser. Your spirit feels lighter. These are signs of transformation happening within you. Above all, this new spiritual sensitivity is God's way of preparing you for what he is about to do in your life. Before elevation comes instruction. Before breakthrough comes alignment. Before divine assignment comes divine awakening. God awakens your spiritual senses so that when he begins to move, you will recognize his hand, follow his voice, and walk in the fullness of his covering. You are not just changing, you are rising. When God begins to separate a woman from draining or distracting connections, it is one of the most profound signs of his divine covering. This process is not about punishment or rejection, rather. It is about preparation and protection. God sees the entirety of your life, past, present, and future, and he knows which relationships, environments, or influences will support your calling and which will hinder it. Under his divine covering, he begins to prune what is not beneficial, removing distractions, toxic people, and unhelpful habits that can stunt your spiritual growth, emotional health, and overall destiny. This separation is often subtle at first, but it becomes increasingly evident over time, and it is always for your highest good. Many women may feel confused or even hurt when God begins this process. A friend may drift away without explanation. A colleague may become distant, or certain social circles may no longer feel compatible with your life. While it is natural to grieve the change, these removals are signs of divine protection. God is shielding your spirit, creating space for relationships and connections that are aligned with your purpose and his plan. The removal of these influences does not diminish your value or worth. Instead, it signals that God is positioning you for higher experiences and deeper intimacy with him. This separation also extends beyond people. It includes situations, patterns, and environments. A job, a routine, or a lifestyle that once seemed comfortable may now feel constraining or even suffocating. God is guiding you away from these limitations, gently nudging you toward opportunities and spaces where gifts and calling can flourish. While change can feel uncomfortable, it is crucial to remember that God's timing and wisdom are perfect. What he removes from your life is not lost. It is replaced with something far better, something that aligns with your spiritual journey and ultimate destiny. During this season, the woman under God's covering begins to develop discernment. She learns to identify which connections are nurturing and which are draining. She becomes sensitive to conversations, relationships, and environments that affect her spirit. This discernment is not born from suspicion, but from divine insight, a result of growing intimacy with God. The Spirit begins to guide her in making choices that honor her calling and protect her emotional and spiritual well-being. What once may have seemed harmless or inconsequential is now clearly seen for what it is, either a stepping stone or a stumbling block on the path to God's purpose for her life. It is important to understand that God's separation is not always immediate or total. Often it occurs gradually, allowing time for healing, reflection, and understanding. You may notice subtle shifts. Perhaps certain friends no longer invite you to gatherings, or some activities no longer resonate with your heart. These are all gentle indications that God is realigning your life. It is a process that requires patience, faith, and trust. Rather than resisting or questioning these changes, the woman rising under God's covering learns to embrace them, recognizing them as acts of divine love and protection. Moreover, this separation serves to strengthen independence and reliance on God. When God begins to remove external support systems that may have been relied upon for comfort, approval, or validation, he encourages a deeper connection with himself. You begin to rely less on the opinions of others and more on God's guidance and affirmation. This shift is crucial because it prepares you to step into roles, assignments, and opportunities that require faith, courage, and discernment. By removing distractions and limiting influences, God creates a clear path for your spiritual, emotional, and professional growth. Another critical aspect of this separation is the opportunity it provides for reflection and growth. When certain people or situations are removed, space is created for prayer, contemplation, and self-examination. The woman under God's covering learns to evaluate her relationships, habits, and priorities in light of her calling. This reflective process allows her to recognize patterns that may have previously hindered her growth, to forgive where needed, and to embrace lessons that will prepare her for the future God has planned. Each removal, whether it is painful or subtle, becomes a divine tool for refinement, shaping her into the woman God intends her to be. Ultimately, God's separation is an act of love. He is not taking away for the sake of loss, but for the sake of destiny. Every person or situation He removes from your life has been replaced by His protection, provision, and guidance. This divine covering ensures that you are surrounded by influences that build you up, relationships that strengthen your purpose, and opportunities that align with your spiritual and personal growth. Through this process, the woman rising under God's divine covering experiences clarity, peace, and empowerment. She learns to trust God's wisdom, embrace His timing, and walk boldly in the life He is preparing for her, free from distractions and fully positioned for her divine destiny. When a woman begins to gain supernatural strength for battles she once feared, it is a clear sign that God's divine covering is upon her. This strength is not merely physical or emotional, it is spiritual, flowing from a deep connection with God, a reliance on His power rather than her own. It manifests in moments when life seems overwhelming, when challenges feel insurmountable, and when fear or doubt threatens to take hold. What once would have caused despair now becomes an opportunity for faith to rise, courage to emerge, and resilience to flourish. This supernatural strength is God's gift, tailored to equip you for the unique battles He knows you must face in order to fulfill your purpose. Often, this strength begins to appear in small ways. You may notice an unexpected patience in dealing with difficult people, an ability to remain calm under pressure, or the capacity to make wise decisions when circumstances feel chaotic. At first, these moments might feel subtle, almost unnoticed, but they are signs that God is fortifying your spirit. Over time, these small instances build into a profound resilience that enables you to face challenges that once seemed impossible. The woman under God's covering begins to realize that her strength is not of her own making. It is a divine empowerment flowing through her, allowing her to rise above circumstances and carry burdens that would have once crushed her. Supernatural strength also manifests in courage. You begin to step into situations that previously intimidated or discouraged you. Opportunities that once seemed daunting are now approached with confidence, not arrogance, but faith. This courage does not come from human assurance or experience. It comes from a deep trust in God's presence and promises. You begin to recognize that battles are not to be fought alone, that God fights alongside you, and that His power is made perfect in your weakness. The woman rising under God's covering learns that strength and fearlessness coexist, not because the world has changed, but because her perspective has been transformed by divine intervention. This divine strength is also evident in perseverance. Life is full of trials, setbacks, and challenges, but under God's covering, you develop the ability to endure without being defeated. The storms of life no longer dictate your emotions or decisions. Instead, they become platforms for growth, learning, and spiritual maturity. Even when the outcome is uncertain, you move forward with faith, trusting that God's hand guides your steps and that His protection surrounds you. You realize that true strength is not measured by absence of struggle, but by the ability to remain steadfast, faithful, and hopeful in the midst of struggle. Moreover, this supernatural strength brings clarity and wisdom. Challenges that once caused confusion now present opportunities for discernment. You begin to see solutions, possibilities, and paths that were invisible before. This is because God's covering not only strengthens your spirit, but also aligns your mind with His wisdom. Strength under divine covering is not reckless power. It is guided by insight, understanding, and the Spirit's leading. The woman rising under God's protection begins to make decisions that honor God and advance her purpose, demonstrating the combined force of strength and wisdom. Another dimension of this strength is the transformation of fear. Where fear once dominated, faith begins to rise. Situations that might have caused anxiety or worry now reveal God's presence and provision. You begin to experience a boldness rooted in trust rather than bravado, a confidence that is not dependent on circumstances but anchored in God's promises. This strength becomes a testimony to those around you, inspiring others to believe that God equips those He calls and that divine covering empowers women to rise beyond limitations, doubts, and opposition. Finally, supernatural strength manifests in spiritual warfare. Life's battles are not only physical or emotional, many are spiritual, requiring discernment, prayer, and alignment with God's will. Under divine covering, a woman develops the capacity to stand firm against spiritual attacks, to pray with authority, and to exercise faith that impacts the unseen realm. She becomes a vessel of God's power, capable of bringing victory not only in her own life, but also influencing the lives of others around her. The strength she receives is multifaceted, mental, emotional, spiritual, and it equips her to rise, overcome, and fulfill the purpose for which God has destined her. Ultimately, gaining supernatural strength is a hallmark of God's divine covering. It is proof that He is actively working in your life, equipping you for higher levels of responsibility, influence, and purpose. The woman who once feared life's battles now meets them with courage, resilience, discernment, and unwavering faith. She understands that her strength is not her own, but a gift from the One who never fails. Through this divine empowerment, she rises above challenges, fulfills her destiny, and becomes a beacon of God's power and glory in the world. When God begins opening doors that you could not open yourself, it is a clear and unmistakable sign that His divine covering is upon you. These doors represent opportunities, breakthroughs, connections, and divine appointments that exceed what you could achieve through your own effort or planning. They are moments when circumstances align in your favor, when people appear at just the right time, and when opportunities present themselves seemingly out of nowhere. This is not mere luck or coincidence. It is the hand of God actively guiding your steps and positioning you for the next phase of your purpose. For a woman rising under God's covering, these doors often appear when you least expect them. You may be praying, working, or even waiting in patience, and suddenly a new opportunity presents itself. An opportunity that aligns perfectly with your calling. It may be a career advancement, a ministry assignment, a relationship, or a divine connection with someone who will positively influence your life. These doors are strategically placed by God. They are not random. They are carefully orchestrated to bring you closer to your destiny, to fulfill the plan that He has meticulously designed for your life. At first, it can be difficult to recognize these doors as divine. Sometimes they appear as ordinary opportunities, but when approached with faith and prayer, their supernatural significance becomes clear. The woman under God's covering begins to discern these openings, recognizing that they are too perfectly timed to be merely chance. She begins to understand that God is actively involved in the orchestration of her life, that He is not passive, but intentional, and that His divine guidance is always leading her to the right place at the right time. This realization strengthens faith, increases gratitude, and deepens reliance on God's wisdom and timing. One remarkable aspect of these divinely open doors is that they often remove the struggle of forcing progress. In the past, you may have had to fight, beg, or exhaust yourself to create opportunities. Under God's covering, however, doors open with supernatural ease. What once took relentless effort and persistence now comes into alignment naturally, as though the universe itself is cooperating with the plan of God. This is not a reward for human effort, but a manifestation of God's favor. The woman rising under divine covering experiences moments when things just fall into place, proving that God is actively leading her and that His favor is at work on her behalf. Another critical aspect of these openings is timing. God's doors always open in His perfect timing, not ours. Sometimes it may seem that the door is delayed, closed, or even hidden, yet the waiting period is part of God's preparation. He ensures that when the door opens, you are spiritually, emotionally, and mentally ready to step through it. The woman under divine covering learns patience, trust, and discernment. She does not force her way through doors prematurely, but waits for God's signal, confident that He will open exactly what is meant for her at precisely the right moment. The opening of these doors also often comes with divine connections. People appear in your life who serve as mentors, supporters, partners, or guides. These individuals are part of God's orchestration, placed in your path to help you step fully into the opportunity He has prepared. The woman rising under God's covering recognizes these connections as divinely appointed and treats them with wisdom, humility, and gratitude. She understands that these relationships are not coincidental. They are extensions of God's hand, designed to support her journey and amplify her influence. Furthermore, stepping through these doors requires faith and courage. Even though the opportunity may feel unfamiliar, intimidating, or beyond your current ability, divine covering equips you with the strength, wisdom, and discernment needed to walk boldly into it. Fear may still whisper, but faith dominates. The woman rising under God's protection understands that divine favor is not passive. It requires action, obedience, and trust. Each step she takes through these divinely opened doors is an act of alignment with God's will and a confirmation of His supernatural guidance. Ultimately, these doors are not just about personal gain. They are about positioning you to fulfill God's purpose. They lead to growth, influence, ministry, impact, and spiritual maturity. The woman under God's covering experiences breakthroughs that touch not only her life, but also the lives of those around her. She becomes a channel of blessing, a testimony of God's favor, and a living proof that divine intervention is real. Through these open doors, God demonstrates that He is orchestrating every detail, removing obstacles, and providing paths that align perfectly with His divine plan for her life. In the end, the opening of doors that you could not open yourself is a sign of God's intimate involvement in your journey. It confirms His favor, His guidance, and His protective covering over you. The woman rising under this divine covering recognizes that her life is not left to chance, that her steps are directed by a loving God, and that every opportunity she receives is part of a larger glorious plan. Through faith, obedience, and trust, she steps boldly through these doors, confident that each one is a gateway to her God-given destiny, and proof that she is truly rising under His divine covering. When a woman begins to experience peace that surpasses understanding, even in the midst of chaos, it is one of the clearest signs that she is rising under God's divine covering. This peace is not simply the absence of conflict or difficulty. It is a supernatural calm that originates from God Himself, a stillness in the spirit that is unshaken by external circumstances. It is the kind of peace that does not depend on the world aligning with your desires, that does not vanish when trials appear, and that persists even when storms rage around you. This is a gift from God, evidence of His protective covering and intimate presence in your life, and it is designed to sustain you as you step into your divine purpose. For many women, life is full of pressures, uncertainties, and challenges that can stir anxiety, fear, and doubt. Yet under God's divine covering, something within begins to shift. You may still face difficulties, disappointments, and obstacles, but your heart remains anchored. You feel a sense of assurance that God is in control, that He is orchestrating every detail, and that nothing can happen outside of His will. This peace is not passive or naive. It is active, resilient, and empowering. It enables you to navigate life with confidence, knowing that your steps are guided and protected by a loving Heavenly Father. One of the most remarkable aspects of this peace is that it often arrives in situations where logic or human understanding cannot explain it. You may be facing challenges that seem overwhelming, problems that appear insurmountable, or conflicts that feel impossible to resolve, yet you remain calm. Others may panic or worry, but your spirit is settled. This is because God's covering brings alignment between your heart, your mind, and His spirit. Your inner world is anchored in His truth, allowing you to rise above fear, stress, and uncertainty. It is a supernatural calm, that defies the natural order and reflects the presence of God working in your life. This peace also transforms how you respond to challenges. Where fear and frustration might have dictated your reactions in the past, patience, wisdom, and grace now guide you. You are able to make decisions with clarity, communicate with gentleness, and act with discernment, even under pressure. The woman rising under God's covering learns that her peace is not just a comfort for herself, it is a testimony to others. Her calm in the midst of chaos becomes a source of inspiration, encouragement, and stability for those around her. People notice the difference even if they cannot explain it, and it points to the supernatural work of God in her life. This peace is deeply tied to trust. It grows as you learn to surrender control, as you acknowledge that God knows the beginning from the end, and as you allow His will to guide your steps. The woman under divine covering understands that she does not have to fight alone or carry burdens that are not hers to carry. God's presence becomes her anchor, and His promises become her shield. The more she leans into this trust, the stronger and more enduring her peace becomes, creating a foundation that sustains her through trials, setbacks, and uncertainties. Another dimension of this peace is its protective nature. God's covering shields you from anxiety, worry, and spiritual attack in ways that are subtle but powerful. When fear and doubt arise, His peace pushes them back, creating a spiritual buffer between you and the chaos around you. It allows you to see challenges from God's perspective rather than being overwhelmed by circumstances. You begin to recognize that difficulties are temporary, that they do not define you, and that every trial has a purpose in shaping your character, faith, and destiny. This awareness fuels confidence, resilience, and perseverance, and it enables you to rise above situations that might have previously defeated you. Peace under divine covering also opens the door for supernatural joy and contentment. When your spirit is anchored in God's presence, you are able to rejoice even amid trials, knowing that He is working all things together for your good. This peace is intertwined with hope, faith, and divine assurance, creating a spiritual environment in which growth, breakthrough, and transformation can flourish. The woman rising under God's protection learns to embrace life fully, to walk boldly, and to face challenges with a calm that radiates strength and confidence. Ultimately, this peace is not earned through effort, wisdom, or circumstance. It is received through intimacy with God, surrender to His will, and reliance on His Spirit. It is a hallmark of His divine covering and a sign that He is actively guiding, protecting, and elevating you. The woman who experiences this peace is rising under God's hand, moving forward with courage and assurance, and becoming a living testimony of His supernatural presence in the world. Through this peace, she is equipped to face anything, overcome every obstacle, and fulfill the purpose God has designed specifically for her life. Anchored in a calm that surpasses all understanding, when hidden attacks or negative patterns begin to come into the light, it is a powerful indication that God's divine covering is upon a woman, preparing her for victory, deliverance, and elevation. Life often carries unseen challenges, spiritual opposition, unhealthy habits, emotional wounds, and destructive cycles that work silently in the background, limiting potential and holding back destiny. These hidden battles may have been affecting her relationships, career, or spiritual growth without her realizing it. Under God's divine protection, however, these things begin to surface, not to shame or condemn, but to bring healing, clarity, and empowerment. This revelation is a sign that she is rising and being positioned for a life of breakthrough. The process of bringing hidden attacks to light is often gradual. It may start as a growing awareness of patterns that repeat in her life, relationships that consistently hurt, decisions that repeatedly lead to disappointment, or inner struggles that seem unexplainable. At first, these patterns may cause confusion or even discouragement, but they serve an essential purpose. God is revealing the root causes that need to be addressed in order to break free and move forward. The woman under divine covering begins to recognize that the obstacles she faces are not random. They are part of a spiritual battle, and awareness is the first step toward victory. This revelation is often accompanied by discernment. God's Spirit sharpens her ability to see the hidden forces at work in her life, whether they are spiritual, emotional, or relational. She begins to understand where deception, fear, or unhealthy influences have infiltrated her mind, heart, and environment. This awareness empowers her to make choices aligned with God's will and to confront areas that need transformation. The process is not easy because exposing hidden issues often requires honesty, courage, and sometimes difficult action. Yet it is always purposeful, designed to remove the obstacles that would otherwise hinder her calling. As these hidden attacks and negative patterns are revealed, God also provides the tools and strength to overcome them. She is not left vulnerable or defenseless. Rather, divine covering equips her with wisdom, faith, and resilience. She may find herself guided to prayer, fasting, counseling, or other spiritual disciplines that fortify her spirit. Every revelation becomes an opportunity for deliverance and empowerment. The woman rising under God's covering learns to see challenges not as setbacks, but as openings for God's intervention, transformation, and provision. One of the most important aspects of this process is that it allows for healing and restoration. Patterns and attacks that were once invisible now come under the light of God's truth. Old wounds are brought to awareness so they can be healed, limiting beliefs are challenged, and destructive habits are replaced with habits of faith, obedience, and godliness. This healing is not superficial. It transforms the inner life, strengthens character, and aligns her spirit with God's purposes. The woman experiences freedom, not just from the external difficulties, but from the internal chains that previously held her back. Revelation of hidden attacks also brings discernment in relationships and environments. She begins to recognize where spiritual opposition has been working through people, situations, or societal pressures. This discernment allows her to make wiser decisions, set boundaries, and avoid unnecessary conflict or harm. Under God's divine covering, she learns to navigate life with spiritual insight, seeing beyond appearances and responding with wisdom and grace. The previously hidden becomes visible, and this awareness ensures that she can step into her purpose with clarity and confidence. Furthermore, this process strengthens faith. As hidden attacks are exposed and overcome, she sees firsthand the power and faithfulness of God. Every victory reinforces trust in His protection and guidance, confirming that she is indeed under divine covering. She learns that even when problems appear concealed or insurmountable, God is at work behind the scenes, orchestrating deliverance, growth, and preparation for her ultimate purpose. The exposure of these hidden elements becomes a testimony of God's power, teaching her that what was once unseen can now be transformed into a source of victory and strength. Ultimately, the illumination of hidden attacks and negative patterns is a sign of preparation and elevation. God does not reveal these things to discourage or weaken her. He reveals them to equip, empower, and position her for a higher level of spiritual, emotional, and personal growth. The woman under His covering becomes vigilant, wise, and spiritually mature, understanding that every hidden battle brought to light is an opportunity for God to intervene, protect, and promote her. She rises stronger, freer, and more aligned with her divine destiny, proving that God's divine covering is not only protective but also transformative, leading her into a life marked by victory, purpose, and supernatural favor. In conclusion, a woman rising under God's divine covering is not just experiencing protection, she is undergoing transformation, empowerment, and positioning for her divine destiny. Each sign, from the awakening of spiritual sensitivity to the revelation of hidden battles, demonstrates God's intentional work in her life. She's being strengthened, guided, and elevated, equipped with supernatural strength, discernment, and peace that surpasses understanding. Doors open, obstacles are removed, and favor surrounds her as God's hand directs every step. This journey is not always easy, but it is purposeful, preparing her to fulfill her calling and walk boldly into the life God has designed for her. Ultimately, she rises not by her own power, but by the faithfulness, wisdom, and protection of the Almighty. With divine covering over her, she stands unstoppable, anchored in God's presence and ready to embrace every promise He has set before her.